CRC Caribbean. And again, I'd just like to welcome you to the Gender Mainstreaming Workshop. Today, we look to have a very interactive session, similar to what we had last week. We hope it to be very informative as well, all towards building our capacity and increasing the efficiency, equity, and effectiveness of the Islands program. So before we start, I just want to run through some meeting protocols really quickly. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you see that we have a few icons. Below we have the reactions icon, where you can feel free to share some emotions during the course of the meeting. There's also that chat feature that you can make use of during the duration of the meeting. Feel free to leave comments and ask questions there. If you would like to see who else is in the meeting with you, there's the participant icon. You can click and see who is here with you today. And if you would like to also ask a question or make a contribution, you can feel free to turn on your camera and unmute your mic and make that contribution. Okay. Candace, could you please go ahead and relay that in Spanish?
Muy buenos días, soy Dana Lewis, yo soy investigadora aquí en el Centro Regional del Convenio de Basilea. Yo voy a presidir este taller sobre la transversalización de género. Es un taller interactivo. Nomás unas cuestiones de protocolo. Aquí en esta pantalla tienen la modalidad de utilizar los iconos, las reacciones. También pueden utilizar el chat para compartir sus comentarios y utilizar el botón de participantes para ver quién se han ingresado aquí al taller. Si desean hacer una intervención, pueden activar sus cámaras y tener el micrófono activado también. En este momento pueden ver un globito en la pantalla y pueden elegir el botón para luego dejar saber su preferencia de idioma.
Okay, so we'll now invite you to click the globe at the bottom and move to the room that you would prefer to hear the meeting in. So we have the English room and the Spanish room. Okay, thanks everyone. So we'll now move on to the first item in the agenda, which is the opening remarks segment. So I'd like to invite the director of the BCRC Caribbean, Ms. Jewel Batchesing, to deliver some brief opening remarks.
Hi, good morning everyone. I hope that you're well. My name is Jewel Batchesing and I work at the center. My role here is very short. For those of you who attended last week's meeting, it's a similar approach of having an interactive discussion, but this one is of course focused on gender mainstreaming. And I just want to stress to you that looking at the GEF7 programming, which Islands falls under, the gender mainstreaming is a very important component of the program. And for those of you who have a lot of bedtime reading to do, and you looked at the GEF8 instructions, it's even more alive in GEF8. So ensuring that we do have gender inclusion in our projects is very important, and the purpose of today's training is essentially to do that. I'm happy to see the turnout this morning, and I hope that you do participate, because it is very interactive with breakout rooms and the use of different apps to ensure that there is participation. So look forward to the discussions and hearing from you. I may not stay for the entire meeting because I was attending another meeting very early this morning. So I am a bit tired, and I can't even answer the question about what I had for breakfast because that was a blur, but I had a cup of tea. All right, so thanks very much. And I do enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Batchison. So now we'll move on, and I'll hand over to Ms. Melanie Ashton from the DGPP.
Hi everyone, thanks Jewel, thanks BCRC colleagues, and welcome everyone to today's session. It's a great pleasure to be with you all again. I found last week's session on stakeholder engagement to be very enjoyable, and it was great to be collaborating with you all through Jamboard and to understand a little bit more about your region. So I'm very excited today to be in Margot's capable hands and to be learning about gender and how we're going to address gender in a coherent way across the program. So please note that after the session, the recordings of both sessions, the stakeholder engagement and the gender session, will be shared via email, and we'll also be onboarding you all to the Green Forum group so that we can keep in contact and exchange further on these, on stakeholder engagement and gender there. You know, this is just, these are initial training sessions, and we're going to continue learning about both of these topics throughout the program. So we hope that we can use the Green Forum as a space to engage on those issues. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to the session. Cheers.
Thanks so much, Melanie. Okay, so now I'll hand over to Margot first to conduct the warm-up and the session's agenda.
Great, thanks, and hi everyone. As we all know, this is our second session today, but this will be learning that we continue on with, and glad everyone's had a good, healthy breakfast. I'm particularly jealous of that passion fruit yogurt option to get us energized to be able to engage and learn on all these different pieces. So if we could drop in the chat now a link with a Mentimeter poll for each of you to go to. We're just going to start off with a couple of basic questions. Want to hear from you each about how, what you think about gender equality and gender mainstreaming. So we could drop that Mentimeter link into the chat. Perfect, there it is. And I will share my screen in a minute as folks start to add their answers in there. Great. Just want to check that folks are able to access it. All right, yes, I can see answers coming in. So the first question is, what does gender mainstreaming mean to you? You get a couple of options to add in here, and you can write, a few few words as a phrase as well. So we're getting equity, equality, respect, diversity, empowerment. Great. Fairness, perspectives, like different perspectives to include representation, opportunity. Excellent. Including women and men. Great. Diversity, diversidad, parity, equal rights, fairness. Excellent. So keep on adding in there. This is just kind of to give us an idea of how we collectively are already thinking about this gender mainstreaming. I'm sure this isn't the first time you thought about gender mainstreaming, nor will it be the last, but really want today's session to kind of ground us in a few different basic concepts and how we can apply this in our work in the Islands Project. All right, then there is a next question, which you should have maybe gone gotten immediately popped up on that link. So you can still access that on the next one. The question was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well is gender mainstreamed in your work or organization? Do you feel like it hasn't really been integrated at all? Not really sure where to start? Or I know I saw some Gender Bureau directors online with us as well. Very excited to see you, Ms. Joseph. So we can also maybe on the spectrum side of fully integrated, we're professionals at this. Seeing that we are not seeing this Mentimeter. Maybe.
Yeah, not when we refresh, Margot, either.
Huh. Well, let me try to figure that out really quickly. Sorry. Here's all the technical switches of this. Okay, let me see. Oh, it's saying, okay, I need to be showing the next slide, but I am showing the next slide. Sorry about this. All right, well, why don't we drop in the second chat actually? Dana, if you can do that for the next question, and we'll come back perhaps to.
Okay, sure, we'll do that.
Sorry, everyone. There's all these great apps to try to do these things, and then obviously they falter, unfortunately. So that next question should be, what questions do you have on mainstreaming gender and gender equality? If you are getting that link, should be able to see that and start to see some questions rolling in on how to do it. That's a great question. We've got lots of mandates from the international levels, regional levels, but what does it actually mean and how do we do this? You can also go to menti.com and input this code if easier than using that link. Where to start? All right. Hopefully in a session like this, this should kick things off for y'all. Are we actually investing in mainstreaming gender and gender equality? How do we measure gender equality? Who to involve? Who are those critical stakeholders? Who can support on this maybe as well? Do men have a role? Do we have a budget for this? That's always an important one. Always have limited resources in financial resources and human resources often. So this is a good discussion to be having. What international guidelines are available? How to maintain continuity of actions or interventions on gender, maybe from one sector to the next, as well as gender is cross-cutting. How can we successfully mainstream this? How do we increase political will? Is gender equality a concern for men? Yes. What would we define as successful mainstreaming? All right, great. So these are really great inputs. These are good questions. And hopefully we'll be able to address quite a few of these questions, or at least start to have a dialogue about this, which is a lot of gender mainstreaming, gender considerations is discussing this. What is the particular context and issues? So with that, I'm going to return us back to our presentation and get going on that to answer those questions. So first of all, today, it's going to be very interactive, like folks have already said. We've had this poll with a few glitches, but we really want to be able to level the playing field for everyone to be able to be involved. Yes, we have some folks that are experts on gender here today. We've also got folks that maybe this is the first time that they've really started to engage in this discussion. So I want to discuss some basic terms and concepts around gender mainstreaming and gender equality. And then how that is linked with chemicals and waste sectors. Of course, this is critically important. It is cross-cutting, but there are nuanced differences in every sector. Then we're also going to be sharing the programmatic approach that we have developed for Jeff Islands globally, and then also for the regions. That is the Gender Equality Action Plan, which is also known as, and you will hear me refer to as, the Islands GAP, or just the GAP, the Gender Action Plan. We'll outline key activities from the Gender Action Plan, which are going to be important to you all as stakeholders and actors, implementers, and citizens, but also community members that also are impacted by chemicals and waste, I would assume, and the regulations that we put in place. And really learning about how you all can support on this with practical application in your own roles. All right. So next up, we are going to share some details about gender inequality globally, which also does translate down to the Caribbean level with some specific details. But gender inequality globally, we know from data, and this is kind of in response to how we can measure this, affects all aspects of life, from education and income to rights to resources and access to different types of services, which are important for women and men and other folks as well. This impacts the potential of all people, their safety, their livelihoods. And so we want to know and make sure that gender equality is a part of the conversation, because we know that this is a human right. It is also internationally recognized as an integral part of long-term sustainable development goals, and also as a part of the different multilateral environmental agreements that surround this project. Despite its importance, however, there is still a lot of work to achieve gender equality around the world. And so these slides demonstrate a few different pieces of evidence and the information that we need to be able to document, so that then we can identify what these gaps are, these challenges are, and be able to respond to inequalities. But we need to be able to have data, right, to be able to show this gap. So we have a few quiz questions for you all, and you'll be asked to respond on your Zoom through a specific poll. Our first one for you to consider is around decision-making. And so this is wondering, since October 2021, when the most recent data was available, what would you say is the percentage of national parliaments in the Caribbean that are women? Is it 12% of women make up national parliaments, 24%, 40%, or 55%? And so the poll has just popped up, so you can go ahead and choose your answer. 12, 24, 40, or 55. Great. And don't be afraid if you don't know the answer, or, statistics are hard to keep track of anyways. So this is just to kind of give us a general idea of what exists in the Caribbean. Giving folks a few more minutes to participate. I think that might be pretty good. So the highest response was for 24%, with about even responses for 12 and 40%. And so the correct answer is actually C. It is very close to 40% at 39.8%. In most Caribbean countries, actually this is a very high percentage. So this is something to be quite proud of, that 40% of national parliamentarians. However, if we look to the ministerial cabinet positions, we see that it drops down to about 20%, only being occupied by women. This is, however, an exception in Grenada, where it's actually close to 40%, which is very impressive. And so decision-making obviously is a very important point for us to have women's engagement, women's leadership, and this can often be influenced by different sociocultural aspects, such as education and family obligations. And so it's important to also recognize how Caribbean girls and boys engage in the education space. And it is actually quite prevalent knowledge that girls have higher attainment in education in the Caribbean and will go on to achieve higher levels of education with higher marks as well. But this unfortunately does not necessarily translate into the formal job economy. Oh, there's the answer for that, 40%. So we know that the unemployment rate in the Caribbean for young women is actually around 33% for women and only 21% for young men. A primary aspect of unemployment for young women is that they take on the primary responsibility of caregiving in that care economy. So this limits opportunities for participating in the labor force. And so another question related to this is for women who are employed, what is the gender pay disparity? So the question is on the next poll, women in the Caribbean earn an average of what percentage of men for performing the same type of work? So the next question should pop up. Is it 17% less, 20% less, 33% less, or 25% more than men? How much do women earn for performing the same task as men in the Caribbean? And this is specific data from the International Labor Organization. And I think we're getting quite a few answers, which is great. Folks have chosen 17%, which looks like you all are statistics gurus because the correct answer is 17%. Globally, estimates are around 16 to 19% for a gender pay gap. And so the Caribbean is pretty standard here, but obviously is something that we would like to narrow. Another question around income is from how much women over the age of 18 who have income, do not have income despite working on a daily basis. And a huge proportion of women actually work in the agricultural sector in this informal care, in this informal workspace. And so wondering what on this last poll you think is the percentage of women who work in the agricultural sector. And this has obviously important implications for this sector around chemical application, waste products, different susceptibility to different chemicals, and how their labor is often masked or overlooked and their contributions are not valued. So take a second to add in a few more inputs on this question. What percentage of women work in the agricultural sector? Is it 10%, 30%, 50%, or 80%? Most people have chosen 30% of women working in the agriculture sector. In fact, it is 80%. This is an incredibly high rate, but is very much indicative of where women's roles are and their informal labor workforce for subsistence agriculture for their families and or their communities particularly. So we know that women play a critical role in all societies, but often this still has a huge gap. But I want to take us back a little bit and discuss some differences between gender and sex and some basics, because there were some questions around, how are men engaged? Should men be engaged? And these are important questions, but we need to make sure that we're using the correct terms to discuss this. So very basic to get us on all the same page is that sex is a biological assignment from birth. It includes chromosomes, reproductive organs, and hormones to determine the sex. Gender, however, is culturally defined. It refers to socially constructed or determined or even expected identities and the roles and responsibilities, attributes, and contributions that girls, women, boys, men, or gender diverse persons have. When I say gender diverse persons, I mean folks that do not identify as one of those binary men or women. Gender also refers to the relationships between and among individuals in a given society at a specific time and a specific place. So how gender is considered today in the Caribbean may be quite different than how it was 20 years ago, thinking about masculinity, those types of roles that women and men had and what has been constructed in society. And around the world, there are different types of genders also to be thought about. So it is very contextual and needs to be considered as such in this project. So some of the gender-based constraints that limit women's contributions include discriminatory laws and cultural practices, limited access to and use of or control over resources and services, and not having much decision-making power. These are constraints that limit women's roles and potential contributions and then contribute to persistent inequalities. They can be due to the gender roles that women and men have, which exist in households, communities, or societies more generally. And these gender roles are often valued and rewarded differently by society as they refer to these behaviors, tasks, and attitudes. And so that is how we get this power dynamic and inequality between women and men often. Gender equality is our goal that we are trying to attain. This refers to the notion that every individual has rights, responsibilities, and opportunities that should not be dependent on their gender. It implies that the interests, needs, and priorities of every individual, regardless of their gender, are taken into consideration. You may also have seen or heard the term gender equity, which in that first question, folks brought up equality and equity, and this is a very important concept to understand the differences between this. Gender equity refers to a process and supportive mechanisms to get to gender equality. It is the process of treating people fairly and justly and according to their respective needs. This next image really shows the difference in these two, in my opinion. In this first panel, you can see how equal treatment is being provided to the different people. And this does not result necessarily in equal outcomes. They're all given the same size bicycle, but depending on their size and their ability, this has different implications on how they're able to use that and enjoy that. In the second panel on the bottom, this is using or applying distinct forms of treatment or measures to compensate for differences, but also in a larger scope outside of these bicycles, historical and structural disadvantages that prevent women, men, gender minorities, or any other intersectional identity of people, such as being differently abled, from accessing or enjoying the same opportunities. So it's really important to understand that we can have different inputs for different types of groups or different people towards that goal of gender equality. So often, again, equity is a means toward true equality, where the interests and needs and priorities of every individual are respected and considered. And there was the question of, does gender include men? And of course, this also includes men. We get this question a lot as gender specialists, and that gender does not equal women, but they are often conflated. And is it important to remember that when we talk about gender inequalities, we are often referring to the inequalities that women face because of those roles and structural inequalities that we just saw, those constraints, due to the sociocultural aspects and stereotypes and those power dynamics that we face, that are present in all societies. And these have been historically constructed by groups that are often in power, which have been men. But men is very important to remember and recognize that they are subject to restrictive gender norms and stereotypes as well about what they should do and how they should act. And this does limit their personal and professional life choices as well. So this is thinking about masculinity and how this can limit their choices or the roles or behaviors that they need to portray in society to perhaps be, valued. So to achieve real gender equality, we need to make sure that we're supporting different inputs for men as well and women to make sure that they can engage and be involved and have men be part of the solution as well. And there's a big movement to really increase engagement with men's organizations to ensure that we are not excluding anyone, but still moving towards equality for genders and supporting women with specific inputs. And so gender mainstreaming is kind of our key thing that we are talking about here today. And there's a question of what is it and how do we do it? So gender mainstreaming is a strategy to achieve gender equality in societies by ensuring that policies and strategies and legal and social structures and frameworks seek to proactively overcome these inequalities. At its most basic level, gender mainstreaming implies simply being aware of gender concerns and attempting to improve equality. But more technically, gender mainstreaming is a strategy that includes processes such as conducting a gender analysis or preparing gender responsive actions to improve the equality, and then monitor and evaluate those processes to ensure positive outcomes. There was also that question of how do we monitor this? And we will actually get an opportunity to investigate that. This necessitates, though, different types of activities. And so I'm assuming that some of you have actually had experience on this. And so we want to be able to hear from you a bit on this, what your different experiences have been. So we are going to go to the Jamboard again. And I want to provide a quick overview for folks who may not have been with us last week on how to use the Jamboard. So let me switch my screen share. And if we could drop the Jamboard chat, or sorry, the link into the chat, that would be great. So folks can head over there, since last week I know we had a bit of a traffic jam on the Jamboard. All right. I'm going to put this in the chat for everyone. So if everyone could go to the link in the chat, you should be coming up on slide number 8. And the question here that we have is, what are key issues of gender in your work or sector? So this is obviously relevant to the project. I want to hear from you. What are these issues that you've already encountered around chemicals and wastes? Or if you're working more broadly in gender or in sustainable development, et cetera, how to, what these are. So for those that were not here last week, as long as you can see my screen, which I think you can, over here on the left side is a sticky note, which if you click on this sticky note, a text box will pop up and you can write, women are facing more susceptibility when pregnant to chemicals, to certain chemicals, as an example. And this has health ramifications. When you post that up, it can be moved around then, and also our team will move them around. But so I want now to give you 5 minutes for folks to grab a sticky note, and you can type in your answer. You can type in as many answers as you would like here to share with us what these different issues, if there are any that you've noticed in your work. This could be in your office space. Are there issues around inequality that you've encountered in your office space or in the policies that are being developed? Are there issues around, who's being engaged in different projects, who's able to participate given the timing of different sessions? Do you notice that often a lot more men show up, or do you notice that a lot more women show up, depending on different types of activities that are being discussed or in different capacity building sessions? Can I check in that folks are able to access the sticky notes or access the Jamboard? I can see 28 people on here. But so, okay, perfect. There's my check-in. That there's a lack of national gender experts. Great. And so go ahead and just everyone, as they come to you, you can add them onto the Jamboard. Perfect. Excellent. Here we go. Here's the jamming. That is great. All right, so I'm going to give you a couple minutes to write down these ideas. And try to be, as detailed as you can about what some of these specific issues are. Access to resources is critical. What type of resources? Access to decision-making, is that at all levels? No understanding of the difficulties in managing childcare and work. That time burden that often is put on women to prioritize care. Safety considerations for field work. Exactly. What type of equipment is available to women and men? The limitation that women with children may have to participate in workshops and trainings because of childcare responsibilities. Laws that prevent overall equity and equality of gender. Exactly. We've got folks logging on from lots of different countries and places, and national laws vary, right? There's gender equality enshrined in many constitutions in the Caribbean, but there are also then specific laws that still, through means, don't really promote gender equality. This could be around gender-based violence, which someone just wrote in harassment in the work field. Someone's noting that the chemical industry is largely male dominated and female inspectors sometimes feel disrespected and unheard. Yes, there can be certainly cultural biases of women breaking into sectors and spaces where they have not normally been. Safety in the field is a big one. Please, Gus. And I'm probably getting sick of hearing my own voice. So if anybody does want to chime in and share any thoughts, please go ahead and raise your hand. We'd love to hear from you if someone has specific examples to share. Great. Okay, these are really great. Thank you all for participating in this. Here's a few more. Availability of sex disaggregated data. Few women or no women available for recruitment. Gender data, huge piece. Okay, great. This is fabulous. So this will still be available and you all can keep adding to this. This is a really great space to be able to document some of these different issues. Part of this is that analysis that this is information gathering for what is actually existing. You all are in this sector, you're experiencing these. So these are real pieces from your own experiences or what you've seen in the field, which are really important to have documented. So thank you. Please do feel free to continue to input, just make sure you don't erase anything. And If at the top of your screen now, you see there's a few squares up here, these rectangles, and you can click over to the next frame where we have our next question. Wanting to hear from you all, since you have encountered these issues, these challenges in your workspace. I'm wondering if you have any examples of mainstreaming gender responsive approaches or social equity approaches that you have been putting in place in your office, in your work, maybe through different projects. What are examples that you've been able to implement? And this doesn't have to necessarily have positive outcomes yet. As we know, gender as this social construct, it can take a long time to see those changes, although we are seeing progress, which is always great to know. But what are some examples, if you have any, of mainstreaming gender based on some of those challenges and issues you just put on the last slide? So you should be on slide 9 now. And feel free again to just grab a sticky note and write down what some of those activities have been or processes. And also, if someone wants to provide verbal input, please raise your hand, and would love to hear from you. Excellent. So people are adding in that there's been inclusion of female inspectors specifically in developing those policies, making sure to hear from them. It's a great example. Implementing a flexi time or flexi schedule for women and men to take on the childcare responsibilities along with their work. It's important to think of, building more equitable structures in family dynamics so that both women and men can participate in work and childcare and home care. Several activities through the Engender project. I wonder if that was Ms. Joseph. That is a really great project, which actually would be very thrilled to share more information about with you all on that project taking place in the Caribbean region to really institutionalize gender mainstreaming. Specific activities on that would be welcome to be added on there. Affirmative action in employment. Recognizing that gender is important. Exactly, that commitment, that acknowledgement is a really critical piece, actually. We can't do much unless we have acknowledged that. Introducing and including gender in policies in companies. Definitely with the private sector, ensuring that there are opportunities then for gender considerations and hopefully women's roles in those sectors, in the private sector. Including gender sensitive language in TORs. Establishing women's associations. This specific example from Trinidad on fisheries management, establishing the first women's organization, which is great, mobilizing that action. Introduction of a gender focal point system. Gender responsive budgeting, also very important. These are great. These are really good examples. This might feel like a hard question for some folks, which is completely fine. Maybe there hasn't been anything done yet that you're not familiar, but these are really good examples to be taking into consideration, learning about, and trying to figure out maybe how this can be integrated into the project, into your office, your work, etc. These are great examples. So just wanted to be able to hear from folks what these are. I'm going to move us on to the next question on the Jamboard as well. So if folks want to head to the next slide, up at the top again, click to slide 10. Here is another question around mainstreaming, but what the challenges are that you've faced. Some of these are probably going to overlap with that first question. What are the issues? But really specifically around mainstreaming. Yes, maybe there's gaps in resources. What types of resources? What barriers have you hit in your organization? Are there challenges with specific type of language to be used, where then, that's politically sensitive, and we need to really think about how to use appropriate language to be able to make progress on these different kinds of equity issues. Resistance from the patriarchy. Yes, that is real. I am feeling it in my home country today. Lack of acceptance and relatability. Yes. Slow uptake on progressive policies. There's quite a generational piece here, which is very interesting to see. I love seeing this, kind of this recognition of, how we move from one generation to the next and making progress, and what kind of the next generation is bringing in. Some don't see it as a priority, maybe don't see it as a priority in specific sectors, and maybe to that challenge of also just not really knowing how to implement gender mainstreaming. Political will is a big piece. That's linked with some of the things on the last one, also, which someone just wrote on budget. We've got a lot of, mandates now for integrating gender, but still a fairly small allocation, evidence shows us, to actually mainstreaming gender. All right, these are really great pieces. Again, challenges as restrictive childcare options. Capacity on mainstreaming gender. Also maybe capacity for women to be able to participate in different sectors, like in chemicals and waste. Have they not had the opportunity to learn and understand what issues are relevant to them and how they're differently impacted? And also this buy-in for gender and national development also is critical. Okay, this is really great. Again, thank you so much to everyone for participating in this. This can be a learning tool for you all. Again, for those of you that were adding in, what are some pieces that maybe you hadn't thought of, or, when you saw that someone else wrote that, oh, right, I've also, seen that issue, or I face that challenge as well. And for those of you that maybe this is a bit more new, look at these, and can you kind of identify some of these issues in your own space, in your own work? And how can we then, move past these challenges? So this is going to be our task, right? How can we look at these different issues and the different challenges, and what can we in this project specifically work on? What is tangible? What do we have resources for? And how we can all do this mainstreaming kind of together collectively. Okay, this is great. All right, we are amazingly on schedule. So I'm going to hand it over to Dana to have us all turn on our videos, and we'll do a photo with everyone, and then take a quick break before coming back and looking at responding to these issues.
Thanks, Margot. So as Margot has stated, we're going to ask you all to turn on your cameras so that we can take a group photo. And then we'll be moving to a break for 5 minutes. So I'll just give you all a moment to turn on your cameras. Okay, great. So there's someone that will be taking the screenshot. So on 3, we'll just smile. 1, 2, 3. Great. Let's take one more before you turn off of the camera.
You were told to wait.
Yeah, one more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. Thanks so much, everyone. So now we'll be taking a short 5-minute break. So the time is now 11 a.m. So we'll be back at 11:05. Okay, thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Should be coming back. I know it's a short break, but hopefully we're able to get either some tea or coffee or check those emails. Could I maybe get a note from folks either in the reactions with a thumbs up or in chat that people are back here and online? Want to make sure we've got a critical mass. Awesome, some thumbs up. Great, great. Y'all are perfect, on time and everything. Okay. I do want to take a moment to see if there are questions at this point. There's been a lot of content already, fairly, general content, again, just around some concepts and issues. And we are going to dive a bit deeper into some components now before specifically on the action plan. But if there are questions, would love to hear from folks, or if there's any interventions people would like to make, some brief interventions to share experiences. All right. All right, well, I don't see anybody's hand up or anything in the chat, so great. That means I might be actually speaking slowly enough for this to be comprehended, which is always my own challenge. All right, well, let's then go back to this presentation. All right. Perfect. So you may have heard me mention in some of those slides already and in that Jamboarding, gender responsive. You may have heard that term also before as well. And so what do we mean by gender responsive? We are using this term gender mainstreaming, and I like to usually say mainstreaming a gender responsive approach, which is a mouthful. But so it's important to recognize that these approaches can differ on how gender is integrated. There's this spectrum of integration, basically, of gender mainstreaming and what that actually can look like and how effective maybe gender mainstreaming is. So on the far left here, we've got gender neutral, or also maybe called gender blind approaches, which are usually constructed on the principle of being fair by treating everyone the same. That's kind of that equality approach, right? But that's not what we want to do in the exact moment of inputs. It can mean that there isn't equal participation or distribution of benefits. However, it ignores the social, economic, and legal rights, roles, and expectations associated with gender, which then can reinforce gender discrimination and inequality. So that one is not so great. As we move down the line, we have gender sensitive. Gender sensitive approaches indicate awareness, although often no remedial action is implemented or developed to respond to these differences. There's awareness of the gender norms and inequalities, but again, not a response. Where we move to the next one, which is gender responsive, which intentionally recognizes and responds to the norms and sociocultural issues by creating actions or policies and initiatives which specifically target the needs of women, men, girls, boys, sexual and gender minorities based on their needs and the opportunities that could be provided to them. So this makes it easier for them to participate and contribute to also the solutions that we are trying to come up with and ensure equality for all and better outcomes. Gender transformative is also on this spectrum. This is an approach which examines and seeks to change power structures and relations and the root causes of gender inequalities and inequalities perhaps more broadly. This is probably heard from and is much more a term that is becoming more popular in language in our kind of development space. But this really is something that is very structural, and it is what we should be aiming towards, but is often a bigger course correction that needs to be taken through more comprehensive approaches and enabling environments. Not to say that we shouldn't be working on that, but in projects such as the Jeff Islands project, we will be likely more contributing to gender responsive activities where we are going to recognize what these inequalities are, the gender differentiated issues and impacts, and then look to respond to those. So that is how we'll be using this terminology. But to keep in mind that gender transformative action is very important. Where someone mentioned the patriarchy, that is certainly that systemic underlying power dynamic and system that continues to have pervasive impacts on inequality in many different spaces. So that's important. And all of these are inputs toward our end goal of gender equality. For meaningful gender equality, where these structures are in place for everyone to have their equal opportunity and access to socioeconomic empowerment and benefits. And I do also have this slide in Spanish. So when we share the slide deck, there's a bit more detail here in Spanish as well for folks. And so I just mentioned kind of those enabling conditions, those pieces that will be really important for that transformative change and outcomes. And so want to highlight some of those because there are specific interventions that can be done to enable gender equality. The approach to creating gender equality depends on this enabling environment, and we need to look at the specific contexts to provide that information. Some things that I highlight often are institutional arrangements. So this can be actively engaging with the national gender machinery, and also establishing and supporting perhaps gender focal point structures and systems, which also someone put in on an activity for what they'd been doing for mainstreaming gender. Gender focal point systems can be across governments, in the line ministries. You could also have a focal point within your bureau and working with different gender machinery, such as the national women's organizations or councils, et cetera. A huge piece of this also is what we focused on last week, which is stakeholder engagement, ensuring equitable participation and active engagement from diverse groups with representation, especially from women's rights organizations, women and gender-related groups, folks who are advocating for equality. And then also really wanting to make sure that there is policy harmonization so that we can integrate gender considerations into responsive actions and national policies. Also, this was mentioned in the Jamboard area to make sure that we are integrating gender, not just in a gender policy, but perhaps in the chemicals regulation policies and strategies, making sure that there is consideration for gender there as well. And a few other options are ensuring that there are financial resources. So this has already been brought up, but there needs to be adequate budget allocated and then actual expenditure as well for implementing these policies and practices. And then a huge piece is that data collection and sharing of disaggregated data. So if we don't have the data and information, that evidence base of what those inequalities are, like what we started out with today, what are those challenges and gaps that we need to work towards, we will not be able to identify what the issues are and move toward gender equality and progress. So again, these are conditions for gender equality that are crucial because they lay the foundation for progress, but these need to work in tandem with specific actions in relevant policies and projects, such as our project. And so how might you be able to integrate gender in project activities as well? This is showing a few different examples of what activities might look like. Again, lots of these have already been touched on today, but this includes collection of baseline data and conducting an analysis. This can be generally a gender analysis or something in a specific maybe project component on, say, e-waste and how it's impacting women and men differently, and also children and youth. There can be a gender responsive commitment in the project, ensuring that political will, making sure that that is at the highest level recognized and needs to be thought about and integrated into every piece of the project. Jewel was talking about that in the beginning. You know, that is coming down from the GEF, those mandates, but also then that commitment by the Islands Project, which we have to ensure that gender can be mainstreamed across the project. Something to consider is a gender equitable team. We have an incredible team of lots of women on BCRC, but thinking about bringing in consultants and who will be implementing those projects, thinking about the different countries. I'm sorry, my cat thinks he needs to be a part of this presentation too. And making sure that we're giving opportunities to, you know, bring about affirmative action in recruitment as well, which some folks said. Engaging gender experts is a really important place, particularly local gender specialists. There is a, you know, an increasing group of gender specialists in the Caribbean with specific expertise on environment related issues, on natural resources, on chemicals and wastes, around, you know, that they can make these specific linkages. They understand the context, the issues that are happening already, and they can work to develop those analyses, provide input for strategic actions to move forward on gender responsive planning and implementation. We talked about this last week also, but mapping and identifying gender equality advocates. Who are those women's organizations? Who are the gender equality advocates in your country? Or even in your institution or your ministry or your department. This project also engages the private sector quite a bit. So how can we identify advocates for gender equality in the private sector, getting those companies on board with this? One of those suggestions to build gender into the policies of companies, that's great, but we've got to make that entry point, make that connection. And so is there an advocate in that organization that we could connect with and have that happen? We also want to ensure that, or a way to also integrate gender is to continually build capacity for folks on gender mainstreaming, such as sessions like this. These resources will be available at your disposal to also use, but also thinking about who maybe would benefit from capacity building on chemicals and waste issues, on specific e-waste issues. Last week, we talked about the informal workers and that labor force and how a lot of people who are in that sector could be women or youth or very impoverished folks, and they haven't had the opportunity to learn about some of these issues. So we need to build their capacity on that. And then we want to take that opportunity in whatever session we're conducting to also integrate gender considerations and a mainstreaming approach. Lastly, as an example, is also sharing the knowledge on good practices and what approaches have been done. I flagged already the Engender project that's been happening in the region and how that has been creating enabling conditions for gender equality through different systems like gender focal points and having the gender machinery, the gender bureaus participate in the national meetings, the decision-making sessions on what to do. That project is around climate change, but disaster risk resilience as well. But that has very real implications here as well, and just how those institutional arrangements have been set up that could be brought in as well. So learning from folks from other projects, but also thinking about this is a global project. And so we're going to have learning and information from other regions, such as the Pacific and the Atlantic. What have they been doing to advance gender equality? What have they tried? What's working? What's not working? Also really important to think about and consider to make sure that maybe we don't need to do that also then, because it didn't work out so well. or it needs to be tweaked to make it fit for this context, and maybe we would have more positive outcomes. So these are different types of activities to consider, could be a part of your process in mainstreaming gender in the project, and more broadly as well. And so now we get to our real piece of our gender action plan for this project. Why a gender action plan? What is a gender action plan? You know, a specific easy answer is it's a place where all of these activities can be maintained and put together, but that of course is not really our answer. We want a gender action plan first and foremost because it will be a tool for us for implementation. It's a tool for all of you to be able to revert back to and guide us to work on this as in, you know, building the foundational means and efforts on gender mainstreaming to continue to move forward on that. This should not be seen as necessarily additional work, but complementary work to all the activities you're doing to create more efficient and effective and equitable outcomes that we don't have to kind of correct on the back end as well. So this is why we, as the global program, are really trying to introduce this at the forefront and get this into this project so that we all can make sure we have better outputs. An action plan is action-oriented. It highlights specific activities within the context of the Islands program, and then also broadly for the regional projects as well, which you'll see in a minute. This outlines kind of, you know, how to do these specific activities or what these activities are, with the opportunity then to make it more contextual for the region. This is going to be institution-wide. So even though this development was part of the CCKM project, which I'm a part of, that team, and our colleagues online today as well, it is meant to provide that umbrella support on gender to the institution, but then also with those specific activities again for the region. And this allows us to measure progress with these activities. Then we'll be able to see from a baseline how we are moving forward. What have we been able to implement and what progress have we been able to achieve? This will help us in collecting the information and evidence to be able to share those experiences and learning, and also to be able to report on this, obviously, to the GEF and the donors. And this, I also think, is a really important point on why an action plan is useful, is that it provides a tool for accountability. So there are a lot of mandates for integrating gender responsive approaches now from the MEAs, the international frameworks, the regional processes such as the Montevideo Gender Equality Strategy, that we need to all be held accountable also to national policies to be able to track and demonstrate this progress. So this is a real opportunity to demonstrate the efforts and leadership of the region and the project in the chemicals and waste sector, and you all as agents of change to implement these activities. And so our gender action plan, we are going to share some broader pieces of it and then specific elements for the region. But these are the general objectives of the plan, which are to provide a targeted approach. We also want to establish an evidence base, since we know there is often limited information, data, and we want to be able to build on that. So this action plan will give us an opportunity to really build that information. It also outlines the key strategies and activities for implementing gender mainstreaming among different responsible actors. And then also is important because we want to harmonize this approach for wider collective action from the regions, then up to the global program, the CCKM program. And so I do want to just make a note that this gap, while it is that global piece, it has the regional components as well, but this was built off of an analysis of initial documents created for this project, which had varying degrees of information. And so wanting to very much point out that this needs to be contextualized for each of the regions. So we are, starting this off in the Caribbean. Y'all are ahead. We're, really working on kind of piloting this with you all, and want to make sure that we understand that there are different issues and needs in each region, and also different capacities, so that needs to be understood. And if there are activities in here that do not feel like they align or have been done, can be check marked, then that is okay. But we needed to create a overarching plan for the entire program. So just to keep in mind. There are 4 focus areas to our gender action plan. They each also have objectives, strategic outcomes, indicated responsibility, and then indicative outputs of where we would be able to show documentation for achieving these activities or outputs of these activities. And then guide on what the timing or frequency of these activities might be for either reporting or when it would actually be implemented. And as mentioned, these will be tracked at the regional level, everything we're going to share, the activities from the regional projects up to then the global CCKM program, which is me, where you will be sharing this information. We will be compiling this, setting up systems to make sure that this is not a burden on y'all, but that we are able to gather this information. One of the biggest things I found in my career as a gender specialist is that often folks don't report on gender. They don't see that it is a critical component. They have these kind of anecdotal experiences that they might share with a family member or a work colleague, but they don't write it down. And so that's something that we're really going to try to move past and make sure that all of this information we're going to be able to collect. And a huge piece of that is that I should be a resource for you all. So make sure to tap into that and use that. All right. The gap focus areas are these 4, which are going to start to look familiar because a lot of this is just kind of repetition of these key points. Disaggregated data, knowledge generation, capacity building, and communication, coordination, engagement, and leadership, and institutionalization. And you'll also probably notice in these activities that there's overlap amongst them. This is an attempt to kind of group them into these focus areas. But again, as gender is cross-cutting, we are mainstreaming this in everything. There, are places where something could be considered capacity building that builds into leadership. So to keep in mind, but also welcome your feedback on these pieces as well. So the first activity, the first focus area is this disaggregated data one. And this generally is that we are aiming to enhance collection and analysis of disaggregated socioeconomic data in the sector. This is looking to gather data and developing frameworks and systems to collect the data. This includes designing indicators that are responsive to different socioeconomic groups, not just tracking women and men's participation, gender balance, gender parity, but how can we actually design indicators that will indicate to us that we are making progress on gender inequalities, that we are addressing the needs of those different groups. So that is being an activity to implement. Then also, thinking about who needs to be involved in this to document this, to build this framework is an important piece in that first sector to make sure that we can collect the data, have the evidence to show that we are working on this. The next focus area is knowledge generation, capacity building, and communication. The objective here is generally to increase knowledge and understanding of the different socio and cultural factors impacting women and men. And we're going to be able to do this with a lot of the data that we're going to be collecting, but also with more specific activities around assessing gender and social power dynamics, conducting those analyses. Also then using that to inform a regional action plan, or if any of the countries take on the role to create a specific action plan for yourselves, that also would be a great piece. We also want to look here to build capacity on gender at all points in decision-making for looking for those opportunities to engage. And that going to be in any of those sessions, again, making sure that gender is part of that in technical trainings and any convenings led by the project, and advocating for sessions on gender where maybe someone in the Islands project is not specifically leading on that, but you've been invited to participate, and making sure that that is part of the conversation in those sessions. A large piece of this one also is going to be research. This project has a lot of research components, a lot of studies, and to build that evidence base, we need to make sure that gender is being integrated into those. So some examples of what that might look like would be conducting a gender assessment on the political, legal, and institutional capacity, conducting a gender value chain analysis for the different sectors, maybe looking at international labor standards and conducting a gender analysis on that. If you're doing an analysis on e-waste, integrate the gender component. Make sure you're understanding the differentiated situations and roles that women and men are facing. Who does what, who has access to what in those sectors. The third focus area, and these are not in any order of importance, is on coordination, engagement, and leadership. This one is really meant to strengthen cross-sectoral collaboration and engagement among stakeholders. So again, very much linked with last week's session around stakeholder engagement, building their capacity, making sure the right people are at the table to have these conversations so that the folks that are most affected are at this, able to engage in this space and improve their lives and livelihoods as well. This looks like mapping stakeholders. When you know who those stakeholders are, then making sure we're getting them engaged. And what are the pathways for engagement? How can the engagement of these different types of stakeholders lead towards that behavioral change through leaders in communities or in organizations such as women's groups, caregivers, social networks, community health clinics, educators in schools, thinking about that generational gap. When can we start to bring in information about chemicals and waste issues into the education system, into primary schools, making sure that kids are aware of these issues? So thinking about opportunities there to implement. We also saw the information in the very beginning around young women excelling in school, but then maybe not being able to have as much of income as men for the same type of work. So that's also an opportunity to get more young folks on board. On the Jamboard, I also saw, that there's no pool of women, and I think someone also added in there's little pool of men as well who are interested to engage in this public sector, which we certainly know there's a huge a higher participation of women in the public sector than men often. And so how can we create internships or mentorship opportunities within the project or with the universities and businesses, training centers that this project will be working with to build their capacity and their skills to engage. And then also on here is developing coordinating systems for the region amongst yourselves and the different gender actors. This would be one of those institutional kind of arrangements of creating a gender focal point system, perhaps. Getting some of yourselves into that gender focal point system from your institution, or maybe you're already a part of it, which let me know, and that would be great to have that information and recognition that already exists in the region or in your country. And then in more practical terms, some of the projects have really specific activities around financial resources and services, and so activities that very much bring in women's access to capital and equipment, access to those financial resources and services need to be part of the conversation and part of this project as well, to make sure that they're not being excluded from those opportunities. And then our Oh, no, sorry. There's a few more on this one. Building capacity still of stakeholders, especially with different types of sessions and trainings. Particularly, we often hear from folks limited skills training for women and also young men very much is a concern. And so building their actual skills to be able to participate either in the business or in the sector as well, and creating those job opportunities for them to engage. All right, doing a time check, and we're doing fairly well. So the last focus area is institutionalization. And a lot of these pieces fit into institutionalization, that mainstreaming gender. This is institutionalizing gender. But this also is looking much more specifically at the global level. Generally, there are a few activities at the region to hire and contract gender specialists within your project, and making sure that they're available and have resources to really support you all in mainstreaming this gender. We're not expecting you to be the experts on gender. It's important to have this, considerable awareness and have your own capacities built on what gender mainstreaming is, but we wouldn't expect a gender specialist to be brought in to do an analysis on e-waste because that is a specific technical expertise, as is gender. And so bringing in specialists who really would understand those nuanced differences and contexts is important. And then also providing mentorship opportunities amongst staff and folks that are a part of this project will be important to make sure that we continue to build a pipeline and interest in this sector. At the global level, these are activities that CCKM will be working on and are supporting the regional projects, BCRC namely, to make sure that this is happening. But again, we are at your disposal, so reach out to us or reach out to BCRC and they know how to get in touch with us. Making sure that all TORs target women and men specifically, that there are provisions for engaging marginalized groups and minorities. Initiating gender mainstreaming in onboarding of new staff is going to be very similar to something like this, where people would be, it would be necessary to go through a short training. Also promoting gender equity in the management structures, making sure that we are creating a safe space for discussing gender equality and women's empowerment through a working group with folks that are interested to be involved. Creating different tools for the projects to be able to use at their disposal for integrating gender in plans and strategies, how to conduct those gender analyses, et cetera. And then of course, tracking and monitoring how gender is being mainstreamed, which I already talked about. And a few key pieces also that we're working to implement is to expand GBV prevention through design and integration of these project activities, so simultaneously with what you all will be doing, and also establishing safeguards and dispute mechanism for accountability for any of the stakeholders and project beneficiaries. So that is the gap in a fairly brief, but also very dense presentation. And I apologize for all of this. I'm getting dry mouth from speaking so much, but that's great because it's about to be your turn. So we want to think about how we can take this forward. We already did some activities on what gender mainstreaming has maybe looked like and how to, build that into your work. But now how, based on that information on what those specific activities are, you can take this forward. So I'm going to introduce this next Jamboard activity, but stay with me for a minute as I provide some directions. So for those of us that were here last week, you'll remember that we went into breakout groups at the end as well to do a collaborative activity. We are going to go into those same breakout groups, which you will be assigned to automatically. And if you were not here last week, don't worry, you will be put into a group as well. We are going to have 20 minutes. If we can do 20 minutes, that would be great. And apologies that we will go 5 minutes over again then, and understand if folks need to leave for other meetings. We'll have 20 minutes in this group, and you will have 2 activities in your group that are going to be pulled directly from the GAP. and your Jamboards will show which group you're in. Each group will have 2 Jamboards, 2 activities to complete, 1 on each Jamboard. And so you should take about 10 minutes for each one. If you fly through the first one, you can move on to the second one. And you will have facilitators in your group who will be there to engage and make sure that everything's being documented and share some more details of this as well. We really want to encourage you to turn on your videos in the breakout groups and have a discussion about these activities rather than last week where we really just did a Jamboard. So please feel free to introduce yourself quickly when you speak the first time and share your experiences and your ideas into this. The Jamboard is being dropped into the chat again, which is great. And if you do go there, you'll see that there are 3 asks that we're going to have for each activity. The first thing is looking at the activity, design what the sub activities you would need to consider to make that activity happen would be. So this could be looking at it for your institution, your country, imagining what, say, a specific study would need to entail. What are the sub activities to achieve that? And then who needs to be engaged? This could be thinking about who is providing different support in those sub activities and who is also maybe receiving some of the outputs from the activities. If, say, it's a capacity building session, who do you need to invite? Who needs to be engaged there? Who needs to be learning in that skills training workshop? And then also, again, because this is crucial and also want to be able to document this so we can respond to this and support you all, what are some of the challenges that you could face in trying to implement these activities? They may be some of the very same challenges that we documented already. Hopefully you can think about how they might be more specific to that activity you're being asked to think about, such as, gathering disaggregated data, or is it difficult to get to rural communities or outlying islands? Are there enough resources to develop these different types of communications tools, to use specific targeting, etc.? Maybe there's social and political issues that you need to think about too, such as an election that's coming up that may switch what the government makeup looks like. I've certainly had these things come up in projects before. So, these are real tangible things to think about, and that when you've been able to document them and think about them, then we can start to work to address those challenges. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Everyone should be hopefully ready to go into the breakout groups now. You should be, you can be back on the Jamboard, but again, you'll go to the specific slide for your group, which you'll see at the top of the Jamboard. I think that's it. So BCRC, if we're ready for breakout groups, I think we can assign them.
Okay, thank you, Margot. I'd just like to now proceed with ending the interpretation. And Candice, could you confirm that the instructions were relayed in Spanish? Okay, thank you. So since we ended the interpretation, we'll be doing consecutive interpretation in rooms 1 and 3. So now we'll allow you to move to the breakout room.
Hello. Mr. Glasgow, are you hearing me? Odessa? Just checking in on if you guys are having challenges with moving into your rooms. Margot, are you hearing me? Yeah?
Yes, I am. Hi, Rachel. Sorry, I was just choosing which group to pop into first. I'm headed there now. I don't know about these other folks though.
Sorry, Margot, are you hearing me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I was having a bit of audio problems. I needed to leave the room. Are you okay to move around?
Yes, I'm gonna jump into the first room. I'll just start in the first. Do you want to send a broadcast message then with like 5 minutes left, and we'll just wrap it up sooner? I'll give,
Okay,
give
sure.
10 minutes.
All right, you will send me the prompts maybe, and I could do that as
Sure.
well. Yeah?
Yeah, okay, we'll do. Do you think we can do it in 10 minutes and go 5 minutes over?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
No props. Mr. Glasgow, Odessa, Cephas, are you all here? Or did you manage to join a room also? Odessa? Cephas, are you here? Mr. Whittaker? Or Odessa?
We're back with you, Margot.
Hello, everyone. Again, feels like time/space travel and breakout groups always. All right, that was very short. Apologies for that. But hopefully gave you an opportunity to see what those, thinking about one of those specific activities and what do we really need to think about and how we're going to implement those activities. Starting to realize, that there's going to be some sub-activities of those where we mapped those different stakeholders last week. There's going to be different stakeholders involved in each of those activities. And, also I think really focusing on that, who's providing that activity and who's receiving that activity also is very important to make sure that we are mainstreaming gender. And do we want to try to run through the jam boards? I know we are past time. BCRC colleagues, I'm looking to you.
Maybe Margot, we could just do one highlight from each Jamboard. Pick
Sure.
your favorite.
That sounds great. So group 1, then Laura, I think that's you, or to share maybe some thoughts for your group.
Sure. Okay, great. So our group, we had, is it shared on the screen? I'm not sure if y'all are seeing our Jamboard. But we had some really good responses provided. We have also had some colleagues from Dominican Republic and Cuba. So we had the interpretation going on. So they were also able to get a understanding of what was put on the little sticky notes. But we have here, we started off with who would be involved first to kind of get an idea of the key stakeholders that would be involved in developing these or understanding these indicators. And then, discussing having a workshop to really bring everybody up to speed with the gender mainstreaming and the expectations. And then, of course, public consultations, community outreach to really get everybody involved. There was also discussion on, the Ministry of Gender Affairs being involved, the Department of Statistics, UN Women for the Caribbean, that was mentioned as well. And then some of the challenges was just, lack of interest and lack of participation, which I think, and the budget constraints and so forth, which is kind of across the board. These are some challenges that would happen with any sort of gender activity. But yeah.
Great, fabulous. Those look perfect. I left right as you all were getting to the sub-activities, and those look great. All right, then skipping to the second group. I actually don't know who was in that group, sorry. But I'll leave it to you.
Hi, so our group, as you see, our Jamboard looks really good. We had a lot of non-verbal contributions, but the contributions were still very valid. We started off with the sub-activities, and the overall here we saw really contacting stakeholders and case studies, conducting case studies was the main highlight here. And in dealing with the persons involved, we saw a lot of, I would just encompass it as community groups or NGOs. So we see here religious groups, youth leaders. So more like our public, getting the public involved, as well as policymakers was a big highlight as well. And for the challenges faced, the top posted there was really the main one. I would summarize everything as an inertia to change. The attitudes towards changing and actually focusing on or taking into consideration gender biases and gender inequality was the main challenge brought out there in our group.
Very, very real challenges,
Yes.
and especially working with stakeholders, that concept of gender, if it's new, really how to introduce that and make that relevant to their lives. That's very important and is a challenge. Thank you for sharing. That's great to see. This looks excellent. then to our third group.
Hi, so we were the third group to coordinate, establish and coordinate gender focal points in chemicals and solid waste agencies. So I think we had a bit of a slow start, but in terms of sub-activities, well, we managed to put a few sticky notes, thanks to the team, for the sub-activities. So first of all, identifying key agencies that have a focus on gender issues, to develop a TOR for your focal points, to develop capacity building sessions to coordinate gender mainstreaming with these select focal points, as well as to share success stories from other SIDS. In terms of who should be involved, so your policymakers, your women's associations, gender experts, as well as inclusion of your government, university, and non-NGO organizations that should all be involved. And that contribution was from Janet from Cuba. And then we have challenges. So in terms of challenges here, we see it as limited human resources. It may not, doing gender mainstreaming or setting up gender focal points may be deemed as not a priority, or you can have possibly insufficient or allocated budget being a challenge, or the lack of awareness and sensitization. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you. I think that's great. And this input around universities and academia is really important. UE in the region is, they've got a huge gender and social development program. They're really, on cutting edge on research, and can look to them to support on, working on mainstreaming issues, capacity building, being maybe part of this gender focal point. But also as stakeholders more broadly as well. So that's great. Thank you for bringing that up. And our fourth group now.
Hello. So firstly, I'd like to commend my group for their critical thinking, because this was a really interesting issue that's not typically discussed in the Caribbean. So how to increase women's access to capital and equipment and markets for livelihood opportunities, particularly in waste generation and the tourism and hospitality sector. So one of the things that some of the things that we considered would have been to promote training in niche areas, develop government schemes that can provide guarantees or loans or grant funding. And in those training sessions, also provide allowances for women to bring their children along, and also provide refreshments for them. Who would be involved from the government end of things, your Ministry of Finance, your gender ministries, ministries with responsibility for gender, NGOs, your inland revenue departments, and of course from the private sector banking institutions. Some of the challenges to this, though, could be the lack of confidence from some women to participate, barriers that would prevent women from even entering the workforce in the first place, lack of support for family services, lack of political will, funding and enabling legislation.
Awesome. Thank you, Janine. That's really great. Those are really specific points, and I think very relevant. Great job. Good job, everyone. And once again, I have to commend everyone on really being able to get on this Jamboard and do this. This is really exciting to see. It's such a great way for us to be able to document this and be able to use it and learn from it. All very much of a gender responsive approach. So I think with that, also because we have kept you now 11 minutes over, and I really apologize, but thank you so much to all of you for sticking with us and getting through a lot of that. Hopefully in the future, sessions will be a little less presentation heavy, but wanted to introduce the gap to you all. We didn't have a lot of time for questions, so if there are questions, you'll be able to ask those for sure. I think I'll hand it over to BCRC now just for final things to wrap up. But thank you all so much for listening and participating. It's been a pleasure and excited to do more work with you all.
Okay, thank you, Margot. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today and sharing your ideas. It's an excellent basis for discussion, and it provides perspective on the topic of gender that we may not have considered before. So thank you again for being so interactive. Before we close, I'd like to invite Ms. Jewel Batchasing, if you would like to give any closing remarks.
No, Jewel doesn't want to give any closing and wishing you all a good day. And you'll hear from us in the future. The CCKM team will reach out through us to you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to invite, or ask rather, Ms. Yolanda Kachu from the UNEP if she'd like to give any closing remarks.
Just to thank everybody for their time, because we always have very good participation whenever you organize a workshop. So thank you everybody for your time and for staying a bit longer and for all your ideas and contributions. Thank you. Very well organized, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kachu. And from the GGKP team, any closing remarks from you all?
Just a really big thank you to everyone. As we noted, we'll be sending out a report of the meeting and some follow-up and onboarding you all to the Green Forum. We are going to be launching a gender group on the Green Forum, so we'll be putting you all in there. And I hope that we can continue exchanging here, Margot, and we can ask these questions, because there was wonderful conversations going on in the breakout rooms in the Jamboarding session. So I think that throughout the project, we're going to be able to learn a lot from each other. So huge thanks to Margot for running solo today and doing a wonderful job. It's not easy. You must need a big drink of water and maybe another coffee. But thank you so much from everyone at the CCKM team. And thank you everyone for participating. It's been wonderful. Cheers.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone. Just to reiterate, you'll receive a follow-up email and you will receive the meeting documents as well as an evaluation form. And here we'll ask for your feedback, particularly on potential future training workshops. So we'd really like to encourage you to fill out that evaluation form. So again, thanks for joining today and do have an enjoyable rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
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 Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Well done, guys.
Do you?
Danielle, could you please stop the recording?
Oh.
Hi, so I dropped during the call, so I'm no longer a co-host to be able to end recording.